Thank you, Mike. Thank you. I just want to tell you guys, a couple years ago I was in Istanbul, Turkey, and ostensibly doing research, but actually I was just there sightseeing. So, but I was at the American Research Institute in Turkey, which is a lovely little place you can stay quite cheaply. And there were probably 10 or 12 other academics there, and I was an academic at the time. I tell people I'm a recovering college professor. I taught for 7 years, and I do now the stuff that Mike talked about, but I did teach college for 7 years. And while in Istanbul, I was there 9 or 10 days, if I recall. And every night, the academics would get together and, you know, have tea or raka, which is Turkish. It's this horrible stuff that's licorice flavored liquor, but I guess if you drink enough of it, it really doesn't matter. But we would have tea and talk, and to a man and a woman every night, except for me. You know, this was during the Bush administration, so there was a great deal of tittering about how horrible Bush was, and wasn't he just, how could the American people vote for him, you know, in sort of a tut-tutting sort of way. And I let this go on for a while, and finally about 4 or 5 days into it, I just announced to everyone, I voted for Bush twice. And I mean, literally jaws dropped. And one professor, who was from Northwestern University up near Chicago, said, I thought you said you had a PhD. So, this tells you where the Academy is on topics like this. And the Academy, sometimes fortunately, but often unfortunately, has influenced the body politic to a great deal, particularly in this administration. Because there are many people in this administration, I mean, there are people in every administration that are academics, of course. But this administration particularly taken cues from and employed people that have been academics solidly on the left. And that influences a lot of their views on not just constitutional issues and domestic issues, but how we deal with terrorism, particularly Islamic terrorism. So this is kind of what I want to talk about. You might know, by the way, where the phrase enemies both foreign and domestic comes from.
Oath of office, military and...
Military and...
Presidential candidates.
Well, immigrants. People that become naturalized citizens have to take an oath. There were some attempts to change it a few years ago, but those attempts were defeated. But one of the phrases in that is, I will, defend the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. So this is sort of my starting point. We can talk about this. Now, briefly, I spend an entire semester, sometimes I have in the past, giving classes on Islamic history. So I'm not going to give you a class on Islamic history because you want to go home sometime this month, right? But just some basics. I like to think that almost, 10.5 years since 9/11, most people are at least somewhat well-versed in issues having to do with Islam, but I found, sadly, and present company excluded, this is not the case. I mean, I lecture every month at the Defense Institute for Security Assistance Management, which is up at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton. And I do a 3-hour block of lecture on, or for, generally Air Force and a few other branches, majors, lieutenant colonels that are deploying to the Middle East. And I do 3 hours basically just on sort of the basics of Middle Eastern Islamic history. And I mean, some of these folks are people that have already deployed to Iraq or Afghanistan, and I'm just constantly amazed that, frankly, they know so little. It's unfortunate. So, just briefly here, now some of you know some of this, forgive me, bear with me.
Slide to the right, to your left, just a foot or so.
There you go.
Thank you.
I can only go so far to the left because of the cord here.
Doctor, whatever you do, don't go left. Recorded in philosophical reasons.
Why I no longer teach college, good point. But does that help a little bit? Sorry, that's as far as I can go. That's as far left as I'm going, I promise. So basically, I think most of you probably know just sort of the brief outline of Islamic history, but you know, Islam is, and I may sort of go back and forth on some of these points here. Islam is the world's second largest religion, next to what? Christianity. Someone always says Buddhism when I ask that question. I don't know where. Buddhism, I don't know where they get this idea. Christianity has over 2 billion people. Islam has about 1.5, 1.6. So, founded about 600 years after Jesus by Muhammad. You know, again, I'm not going to go into this in great detail, but basically, Islam claims to be the corrected monotheism that Judaism and Christianity should have been. Right? Islam ostensibly believes in the Old Testament prophets, even in Jesus, but that the Jews and then the Christians basically corrupted the revelation from God, and then Muhammad has to be sent as the last prophet. And you'll see this a lot too in popular media. BBC likes to push this, other entities. You know, Muslims believe in Jesus. I mean, Muslims say that to me. Believe it or not, I actually went to Iran in 2008 and came back. This was before I consulted with the government, and so they invited me for a conference in Tehran. And I went because I figured, when am I going to get to go again on the Ayatollah's dime? So I did. But while I was there, one of the Iranian clerics, a very nice guy who spoke decent English because my Persian is terrible, said, you know, we believe in Jesus too. And I said, well, not exactly. I mean, the Jesus of Islam is a prophet. The Quran denies the crucifixion and the resurrection. It denies the Trinity and denies the key teachings of Christianity. In fact, in most Islamic formulation, Christians are mushrikun. Mushrikun means polytheists. Why? The Trinity. The Trinity is misrepresented in Islam as being worship of 3 gods. So when people come and tell you, you know, Muslims believe in Jesus too, it's a quite different Jesus. Islam, how did Islam become the world's second largest religion? Well, and this is an issue that both the right and the left make mistakes on, and I think we need to be careful about that. I'll come back to this topic later. But Islam was not spread only by jihad, but it was spread in many ways, many times, many places by jihad, holy war, right, by conquest. Conquer an area, the leadership becomes Muslim, and then you put social pressure on and other kinds of legislation, Sharia in particular, Sharia Islamic law, to sort of force people to convert, which most of them wind up doing. I mean, what's amazing about the Middle East actually is not that, well, I'll put it this way, what's amazing about the Middle East is there are so many Christians, although there are few relatively. I mean, Egypt is about 10 to 13% Christian. It's amazing that those people have resisted the pressure, the second-class citizenship to which they are subjected for so long. But Islam was also spread peacefully. I mean, by traders, by scholars, by what are called da'is, Islamic missionaries. So it's not either or, it's both and. I mean, this is one of my pet peeves that I often talk about and write about, is that the issue, talking about Islam in just about any way, has become so politicized in this country. And I tell people sometimes, tell me where somebody is on the political spectrum, and I can almost guarantee you, I will tell you what their views are on Islam. I can just tell you without even talking to them. And I've yet to be proved wrong on this one. So, you know, the left is wedded to this idea that Islam is a peaceful religion and it's being quote-unquote hijacked by a few bad apples. And that's just demonstrably wrong. But on the other hand, far too many folks on the right, and I consider myself to be somewhat on the right, say the exact opposite. Islam is a bunch of bloody scimitar-wielding, murderers, and there's nothing redeeming and no moderate Muslims at all. And that's not true either, right? So, Islam early on differentiated into different branches. Everybody, I think, knows the major branches are Sunni and Shia. What a lot of people don't know is there are at least 3 different kinds of Shia. There are other sects. That's S-E-C-T-S. I always have to say that for the military audiences I generally lecture to. Islamic sects, S-E-C-T-S. Not the kind involving 4 wives. Sufis, who are mystics of Islam. There are other sects of Islam, dozens, that I'm not going to go into. But in case you're on the big difference, Sunni and Shia. Sunnis believe that after Muhammad died, basically the community picks a leader, and it could be anybody as long as it's male and, you know, a pious Muslim, and basically those are the rubrics. The Shia were a group that believed that it had to be somebody descended from Muhammad, and Muhammad didn't have any sons, but he had a cousin Ali who married his daughter Fatima. So this is 7th century Arabia, this stuff was okay. It's still okay in certain parts of the world now. But Muhammad thus had grandsons, and there's a line of what are called imams traced through his grandsons. This is what the Shia believe in, all right? And they believe that the last of these guys, the 12th imam, you've heard talk about the 12th imam in Iran, right? The 12th imam disappeared. He did not die in about 874 AD, and this guy, who was 5 years old when he disappeared, will return at the end of time. That's what's called the Mahdi, sort of the Messiah figure in Islam. So, is Islam a religion? Yes, it's a religion, okay? It is a very political religion, arguably the most political religion on earth. It is often a very violent religion, not always, but often, but it's still a religion, all right? I think when we go out, and a lot of my conservative friends try to make the argument, particularly my evangelical friends, it's not a religion. Well, yes, it is. And if you try to argue it's not a religion, you just sort of like lose your credibility with a lot of people, okay? Look, it has a heaven, a hell, it has an eschatology, beliefs about the end of time, angels, demons, a prophet, a book. It's a religion, all right? Just because we don't like it doesn't make it not a religion, okay? So it's a religion, very political, too often violent, but a religion. So that's just an argument that doesn't hold much water. And by the way, I mentioned earlier, world's second largest religion. Where are the most Muslims located? Indonesia. I have a list up here, right? Indonesia, Pakistan, Bangladesh, India. Notice it's not until you get to number 5 that you're in the Middle East. Yeah. Right? We tend to think of Islam as an Arab religion, I think a lot of people do. But most Muslims are not Arabs. So, I mean, it was started by an Arab, and in many ways they are privileged within Islam, but not. How many Muslims in the U.S.? The president's fond of repeating this propaganda from CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, and you see this in media organs all the time, 7 to 10 million. There's never been any study done that shows 7 to 10 million Muslims in America. The only comprehensive study ever done was done by Pew a year or two ago, methodologically sound survey, 2.6 million Muslims, which is up from about 900,000 in the year 2000. So Islam, perhaps, we don't know exactly, Islam is probably the fastest growing religion in the country. So, and the number of mosques have increased from about 1,200 or 1,100, 1,200 around 2000 to about 2,100 now. So, it's really hard to buy into the argument that there's rampant Islamophobia in America when Muslims are growing by leaps and bounds. So, that's a tough road to hoe that you get. And just quickly, here's the map. It sort of gives you a global picture. You know, Russia is Orthodox Christian. You know, the West is mainly Protestant or Catholic. Sub-Saharan Africa, as you see, is predominantly Christian. Northern Africa is, and the Middle East is predominantly Muslim. So, China is an interesting issue because there is research that shows that Christianity is growing incredibly fast in China. And in fact, that there are some studies that say there are now more Christians in China than there are in many Western European countries. You've got 1.5 billion people. If even 10% are Christian, which is probably about accurate, it's 150 million Christians. So that's something that's geopolitically going to change the world in a few years, but not my topic. So now jihad. All right, just quickly. I don't know. You've probably heard this, read it somewhere. There's the greater jihad and the lesser jihad. And the greater jihad is, you know, being a good Muslim, or you know, fighting against your own sins. Fill in the blank. The lesser jihad is blowing up infidels, right? Anybody ever heard this, read it? See this a lot. Well, it's frankly false. This is based on what's a hadith, all right? For Islam, there's the Qur'an, which of course is believed to be the literal word of God. So, and by the way, just so anybody doesn't know, I'm Lutheran, I just want to make sure everybody knows this. Because, well, this is a bit of an aside, but just so everybody knows, a few years ago I was asked, when I was back home, because I'm from Northern Kentucky, a friend of mine goes to a big Methodist church in Cincinnati. He said, could you come and speak to our class on Islam? So I did, and I had a full beard at the time. And so I gave this talk on Islam, and I said, any questions? And this nice little lady says, now what do you people believe about whatever it was? I said, well, ma'am, do you mean Lutherans? She thought I was a Muslim. It's because I had a ZZ Top beard, I guess. I don't know. But no, I'm a Lutheran, so. And whenever someone calls me Islamophobe, which I do get sometimes in print and in person, I respond, well, if I really hated Muslims and Islam, why would I have spent 20 years studying Arabic and the Middle East and Islam? Generally, when you hate things, you don't study it that much. I guess there are exceptions, but Islamophobe is one of those terms, as I think most of us know. It's just meant to stifle debate. It's not meant to be intellectually honest in any way, shape, or form. Okay, jihad. Jihad is a key concept in Islam. Muhammad himself engaged in jihad, right? The Qur'an has, by one count, over 164 passages that deal with jihad and the analogous term qital, which means killing, all right? And yes, there are passages in the Qur'an that mitigate this, that undermine this, that talk about the Qur'an, trust me, I've read it in Arabic and I've read it in English. It's profoundly schizophrenic, right? It says in some places, closest to you in belief are the Christians. And in other places it says, take neither Jews nor Christians for your friends, right? That's just one prominent example. What a lot of people don't know about, and you'll often see this argument, well, the Quran is peaceful, and the people that want to make that argument, will, either Muslims or non-Muslims, will adduce certain passages. Mostly what they seem to be ignorant of is that there's this doctrine called, in Arabic, naskh. Naskh means abrogation, overruling something. This was long ago developed in Islam, and the belief is that any of the revelations, alleged revelations to Muhammad that appear later in the Quran, that were given to him later in time, closer to his death, rather than earlier in his career, outrank any of the earlier ones, right? So if Muhammad got a revelation because Muslims believe that either God or the angel Gabriel spoke to Muhammad, any revelations that he got, toward the end of his life, outranked the ones he got earlier in his life. And there is a belief among Sunni Muslim scholars that Surah Al-Tawbah, which is Surah 9, verse 5, Surah means chapter, of the Quran, which says attack, besiege, kill, basically, ambush the infidels, the unbelievers, wherever you encounter them, that this was not, if not the last, one of the last revelations Muhammad ever got. Therefore, it outranks everything that came before. So this is what the jihadis and the people that are advocates of jihad always bring forward. And this is not an argument that Dick Cheney's staff made up, or some Islamophobe on guesting on Bill O'Reilly. This is a doctrine of Sunni Muslim scholars. So the point of this is that jihadists are on solid ground when they talk about doing what they do. It's not radical. It's not extreme. This is mainstream Islam. So this is problematic. Also, you have Muhammad's life. Muhammad, as I mentioned a moment ago, led armies in battle. Muhammad also at one point ordered the beheading of, we're not sure exactly, somewhere between 600 and 900 according to the Islamic accounts. Again, not Dick Cheney's staff. According to the Islamic accounts, Muhammad ordered the beheading of 600 and 900 Jewish men in the city of Medina who were allegedly plotting to remove him from power because he had come to power in Medina after leaving Mecca. And this is, among other things, this is an indication that bad blood between Muslims and Jews didn't start when Israel came along. It's ancient, unfortunately. And then, as I mentioned a moment ago, hadiths. There are thousands of these hadiths, which are alleged sayings of Muhammad, many of which probably are historically true, many of which are not, because there's no way of corroborating. I mean, it's clear I've studied some of them. You can't study all of them. You'd have to spend your whole life. I studied some of these hadiths when I was writing my doctoral dissertation, which was about what Muslims believe about the end of the world. And it's clear that many of them were simply fabricated. I mean, they're political issues. The early Muslim community, who's going to be in charge after Muhammad died? Well, I heard you know, Jafar al-Sadiq says that I heard Muhammad say one day that it should be us. And, you know, Abu Salam says I heard one day Muhammad says it should be these other guys. And so it's clearly political. It became political football. But this is the hadiths, which exist in multi-volume collections for both Sunni and Shia, are second in authority only to the Quran. And much of what Muslims believe, frankly, is not in the Quran at all, it's in the hadiths. So, like, just a prominent example, the main figure I mentioned earlier that comes at the end of time for Muslims, called the Mahdi, that will make the entire world Muslim. The Mahdi is nowhere mentioned in the Quran, only in hadiths. So, but yet it's become a mainstream belief in both Sunni and Shia Islam. And again, jihad and these three pillars, sort of, the Quran, the Hadith, and Muhammad's life, have been used to justify Islamic expansion throughout history by various and sundry states. By the way, the first suicide bombers that we know of in history were a sect of the Shia called the Ismailis. You've heard of the assassins. You know the term assassin. The term assassin comes from these guys because they were called the Hashishiyah in the Middle Ages. They fought the Crusaders and they fought other Muslims. And the belief was, although this has been called into question in recent years, the belief was they smoked a whole lot of hashish before they would go out to commit their suicide bombings. Hence Hashishiyah. But that's where the word assassin comes from. So, and as I said a moment ago, and I actually got so annoyed with this, I called in and got on Bill Bennett's show the other morning. And Bill actually let me talk for about 5 minutes. And I pointed out, Bill, this is not radical Islam. This is not extremist. This is mainstream, all right? All right? If one reads the Quran and these hadiths literally, right? Literalism in Islam is very problematic because there's so much in the Quran and the hadiths that promote violence. Okay? A little different, because if you're a literalist New Testament Christian, you have to turn your other cheek and do other unpleasant things that most of us can't do, right? There's no turn the other cheek in the Quran, unfortunately. So I tell people, you know, I was raised a Southern Baptist before I became Lutheran, and I actually was raised in Kentucky with a friend whose father was a pastor at one of those snake handler churches. Well, he died one, I don't know if it was Sunday night or Wednesday, but they had the copperheads or whichever ones they used in the service, and I guess he didn't have enough faith, right? Because the snake bit him. I mean, I guess kind of amusing now. It was pretty tragic at the time, however. But this is an example, and that's that passage in Luke, I believe it's 19:10, where Jesus tells the disciples, right, you will be able to handle poisonous snakes and drink poison and do other things. Now, 99.9% of Christians don't take that literally, right? And it can be, because we've developed what's called an exegesis, right, an exegetical paradigm, a way of reading the scriptures that developed long ago in Christianity and in Judaism, where you don't necessarily have to take everything in the scripture literally. Take it seriously, don't take it literally. So we would say, well, those passages, well, that was Jesus talking to those guys. It doesn't apply to me. It applies to Peter and John and those guys. Or, you know, there are different ways of believing it's true, but it doesn't necessarily have to be literally followed by us. In Islam, that paradigm is not allowed, right? You have, but by mainstream Islam, there's some sects that may allow it, but in mainstream Islam, you have to take everything in the Quran literally, and it has to apply across space and time, right? This is very problematic. Islam has never developed this idea that the Quran can be read allegorically or other than literally. So, and when it's full of passages about jihad and beating your wives, plural, then it becomes problematic, does it not? All right, now how does this work out in the modern world? Since 9/11, 82% of those arraigned for terrorism in the US have been Muslims, right? There are, of course, outliers. There are exceptions. You know, the gentleman up in Gainesville who were plotting the ricin attack at the, what, Waffle House or something, who were arrested a couple of years ago or something, a year or two ago. And there's, of course, there is domestic terrorism that's non-Muslim. But since 9/11, there's the figures. According to the Chicago, I always forget what the CIVIC stands for, Chicago Project on the Study of Terrorism. In the 30 years between 1981 and 2011, there are the statistics. Right? A lot of people were killed and wounded and maimed in the name of jihad, in the name of Islam. Oh, but what about the Crusades and the Inquisition? That's the one I always get. Well, the last time I checked, the Crusades ended 900 years ago. The Inquisition, in its totality, which, by the way, also ended a while back, the Inquisition in its totality never killed as many people as jihadists do in a single year. What about Christian abortion clinic bombers? Do you know how many people have been killed by Christian abortion clinic bombers in America? And every one of them is a tragedy, and I'm against it, of course, as if I need to say that, but 9. I say, if you're a jihadist and you only kill 9 people, you get kicked out of the club. Right? I mean, again, last month, I was lecturing at Wright-Patterson, and in a break, an Air Force major came up to me, female major came up to me, but what about Christian terrorism? I'm like, what about it? It's a null set, practically. I mean, But I mean, this is an educated woman, major. I don't know if she'd either been through the war college or was going to go through the war college or through Leavenworth, not the prison part, the school part. And she asked me that question, to which I responded, "Did you go to public school?"
Government.
Yes, it did.
Yes, as I said at the Kennesaw thing we had a couple of weeks ago on why there are no conservatives or very few conservatives in academia, I said I would sell one or both of my kidneys to keep my children in private school. The State Department has a list of foreign transnational terrorist organizations. Last time I checked, which was a couple weeks ago, over 60% of them were Islamic. And I called out, by the way, groups that were clearly nationalist and not Muslim, that were perhaps ostensibly Muslim, like if you ever heard of the PKK in Turkey, which is a Kurdish group that's been fighting for years to create a Kurdish homeland. And it's predominantly Muslim, but I took them out because they are nationalists, not Islamic. Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, take them out because they're a Marxist group, Marxist secularist group. So once you do that, even pull out groups that maybe are on the, don't quite qualify, over 60% of the world's foreign transnational terrorist organizations are Muslim. Now Muslims don't make up 60% of the world's population. So there is a disproportionate problem in Islam with terrorism, okay? Mind you, most Muslims are not terrorists, but the majority of the world's terrorists, unfortunately, this is a fact, are Muslims. Why? Now, there are other factors, okay? There's economic factors, there's social factors, there's political factors, there's, personal psychological factors, no doubt. But one can't deny the religious factor here. One has to unpack that. By the way, there are 2 groups on this list that are even ostensibly Christian. There are 2 offshoots of the IRA, which I think are about, maybe a couple of guys in a pub that have access to a fax machine, okay? The real IRA and the continuity IRA, who have not killed anyone for years. But they're put on there, I think, because the State Department has to try to look like they're appearing fair-minded. But even they can't obfuscate the issue enough to get all the Muslim groups off. 3 of the 4 state sponsors of terrorism are Muslim states, and you could probably add several more states to that, but we don't for political reasons. Iran, Sudan, and Syria are on there right now. So certain others should be, but we shan't go into that.